In 1965, the average American farm kid could do things before breakfast that most adults today could not figure out with a YouTube tutorial and a full weekend. They could read the weather from cloud formations, pull a calf from a struggling heifer, and sharpen a blade on a wet stone without losing a finger. By age 10, they had skills that would take a modern adult a semester of classes to learn poorly. Number 18 on this list was so dangerous that insurance companies tried to ban children from doing it. Number 7 is a skill the United States military still teaches Special Forces recruits. And number 3 activates a part of the brain that modern children almost never develop. A finding scientists at Texas A&M recently proved. These were not hobbies, they were survival. Before we begin, subscribe, because what you are about to hear might make you rethink everything you thought you knew about childhood. Let us count them down. Number 25, reading the sky for weather. Before the Weather Channel launched in 1982, farm families depended on children who could read clouds the way city kids read comic books. By age 6 or 7, a farm kid in Kansas or Iowa could look west at sunset and tell you what tomorrow would bring. A red sky at night meant high pressure moving in, fair weather. A red sky at morning meant moisture was coming fast. Mare's tails, those wispy, high cirrus clouds, meant a front was from 24 to 48 hours away. A greenish tint to the underside of a thunderhead meant hail, and you had maybe 15 minutes to get the livestock under cover. This was not folklore. The National Weather Service has confirmed that many of these observations align with actual meteorological science. Cloud reading was taught the same way you teach a child the alphabet. Repetition. Every morning, every evening, look up and say what you see. By 10, these kids had logged thousands of observations. They were more accurate than the county radio forecast about half the time. We lost this when Doppler radar made it feel unnecessary. But radar tells you what is happening now. Cloud reading told you what was coming. Number 24, candling eggs. Every farm kid knew how to candle an egg before they knew how to ride a bicycle. You would hold each egg up to a bright light, usually a bare bulb in a dark room, and look through the shell. A clear egg was good for selling. A dark spot meant it was fertilized and developing. A blood ring meant the embryo had died. Air cells told you how old the egg was. The bigger the pocket, the older the egg. Your mom might collect 3 or 4 dozen eggs a day from the hen house, and every single one got checked. In 1960, a dozen eggs sold for about 57 cents at the farm gate. Sending a bad egg to the general store meant losing a customer and your reputation. Children learned to rotate each egg slowly, watching the yolk drift inside, feeling the weight, and making split-second judgments. It took maybe 2 seconds per egg once you had the knack. Modern egg farms use electronic candling machines that process 30,000 eggs an hour. But those machines miss things a trained 10-year-old would catch every time. Number 23, milking by hand. The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, and nobody cared that you were 7 years old. Cows needed milking twice a day, 12 hours apart, and that schedule did not bend for birthdays, snow days, or the flu. A farm kid learned the rhythm early. Sit on the stool, press your forehead into the cow's flank so you could feel her shift before she kicked. Wrap your fingers around the teat, squeeze from top to bottom, and aim for the pail. Not the barn cat, though barn cats learned to sit with their mouths open. The average family cow in 1962 gave about 3 gallons a day. That was 12 quarts of milk your family either drank, churned into butter, or sold. The whole process took about 8 to 10 minutes per cow if you had good hands. Bad technique meant sore forearms for days. Milking machines existed by then, but small farms with fewer than 20 head could not justify the cost. So children milked. Every morning, every evening, no exceptions. That rhythm taught something no classroom could. Responsibility does not care about your feelings. Number 22nd, mending barbed wire fence. If you grew up on a cattle ranch anywhere from Montana to Texas, you learned to mend fence before you learned to drive. A broken strand of barbed wire meant cattle on the highway, and cattle on the highway meant lawsuits, lost animals, and sometimes dead motorists. Your dad handed you a pair of fencing pliers, a spool of wire, and a pocket full of fence staples. You learned to splice broken wire by making a loop, hooking both ends and twisting tight. You learned which staples held in cedar posts versus pine. You learned to stretch wire taut using a come-along without snapping it. And you learned fast that barbed wire cuts through leather gloves like they are made of paper. Those scars on your forearms were badges. Every farm kid had them. A roll of barbed wire cost about $8 in 1963 and fenced roughly 80 rods. Children walked the fence line every Saturday checking for breaks. The sound of that wire singing tight when you stretched it right, that clean metallic hum, meant the job was done properly. Number 21, driving a tractor. By 1965, most farm kids were operating tractors by age 8 or 9. Not around the barnyard for fun, but in the field doing real work. Pulling a hay wagon, disking a field, running a manure spreader. A John Deere Model B cost about $2,400 new in 1960, and it was the most expensive thing on most small farms. Children learned clutch and throttle coordination on machines with no power steering, no roll bars, and no seat belts. The National Safety Council reported that tractor accidents were the leading cause of farm fatalities throughout the 1960s, killing over 800 people a year. Parents knew the risk. They taught their children anyway because the work had to be done and there was nobody else to do it. You learned to watch for ditches, soft ground, and the tipping point on hillsides. You learned that a tractor can roll backward in less than a second if you pop the clutch wrong on an incline. And you learned that the power takeoff shaft spinning behind you would wrap up a pant leg and take your limb before you could scream. This was the education that mattered on a farm. Physics, not from a textbook, but from consequence. Number 20, identifying animal tracks. A farm kid in the 1960s could read the ground the way a detective reads a crime scene. Raccoon prints near the hen house meant you were losing chickens tonight unless you set a trap. Coyote tracks along the fence line meant the sheep needed to be penned closer. A line of deer tracks through the corn meant you had been losing bushels without knowing it. Fox, possum, skunk, rabbit. Hawk, talon marks in the dust near the poultry yard. Each track told a story. Your grandfather taught you by walking the property at dawn when the dew made prints visible in soft earth. He would point and quiz you. How many toes? Front paw or back? Walking or running? Which direction? How old is this track? By 10, you could walk a fence line and know exactly what had visited overnight. Modern trail cameras do this now, but cameras tell you what was there, and tracks told you what it was doing and where it was headed. First pattern break. Here is where things shift. The skills we have covered so far might seem quaint, but the next group saved lives. Number 19, sharpening a knife on a whetstone. Every farm kid carried a pocket knife by age 7, not as a toy, as a tool. And a dull knife was more dangerous than a sharp one because you had to push harder, and that is when blades slipped. Your dad or granddad taught you to sharpen on a whetstone, the flat gray or tan stone kept in the barn on a shelf worn smooth from decades of use. Wet the stone. Hold the blade at a 20-degree angle. Push the edge forward like you are trying to shave a thin layer off the stone. 5 strokes on one side, 5 on the other. Then test it on your thumbnail. If the blade caught, it was sharp. If it slid, 5 more strokes. A good Arkansas stone cost about $2 in 1962 and lasted a lifetime. Farm kids sharpened everything: pocket knives, hay knives, hatchets, sickles, and mower blades. The sound of steel on wet stone was the soundtrack of a Saturday morning. This skill is so fundamental that the Army still teaches it in basic field training. We replaced it with disposable blades and called it progress. Number 18, handling livestock in a chute. This was the one insurance companies hated. A 9-year-old standing in a wooden chute, shoulder to shoulder with a 600-pound steer, working the head gate while the veterinarian gave vaccinations. Cattle chutes on small farms in the 1960s were built from rough-cut lumber, and the whole family worked processing day. Children had specific jobs: open the gate, close the head gate when the animal's head came through, hold the tail, hand tools to the adults. The danger was real. A panicked steer could crush a child against the rails without trying. But farms operated on family labor, and there was no such thing as too young if you were tall enough to reach the latch. By 1964, the average cattle operation in the Midwest ran about 50 head, and every one of those animals needed vaccinating, deworming, and ear tagging at least once a year. Kids learned to read an animal's body language. Ears pinned back meant trouble. A raised tail meant move. Wide eyes meant the animal was about to bolt. This was animal psychology learned at waist height with real consequences. Number 17, plucking and dressing a chicken. Sunday dinner did not come from a styrofoam tray wrapped in cellophane. It came from the yard. Your grandmother picked the bird, wrung its neck, or used the hatchet on the chopping block, then dunked it in a pot of water heated to about 145 degrees. Not boiling, scalding, just hot enough to loosen the feathers without cooking the skin. Then the plucking started. You grabbed fistfuls of wet feathers and pulled. Pin feathers, the tiny stubborn ones, got singed off with a rolled newspaper torch. Then came the gutting. One careful cut down the belly, reach in, pull everything out in one motion if you were experienced. Save the liver, heart, and gizzard for gravy. Your mom could go from live chicken to table-ready bird in about 20 minutes. Children learned this by watching first, then helping, then doing it solo by age 9 or 10. A fryer from the yard cost nothing but feed. A fryer from the store cost about 35 cents a pound in 1963. Farm families saw that as paying for laziness. Number 16, stacking hay bales. A standard rectangular hay bale in the 1960s weighed between 50 and 75 pounds. Farm kids as young as 8 rode on the hay wagon, catching bales as they came off the baler chute and stacking them in interlocking rows so the load would not shift on the ride back to the barn. Then came the real work, stacking in the hayloft. The loft got hotter as it filled. Temperatures above 120 degrees were common in a barn loft in July. The chaff and dust stuck to your sweat, got in your eyes, down your shirt, and into your lungs. Your arms ached, your back burned, and there were always more bales coming. A good hay day meant putting up 500 bales or more. The whole family worked, and children were expected to keep pace. The interlocking pattern of the stack mattered because a poorly stacked loft could collapse and kill someone. You learned this once, and you never forgot it. Modern round bales weigh 1,200 pounds and require machinery. Nobody stacks them by hand. But those rectangular bales built a kind of toughness that you could not fake. Second pattern break. Controversy incoming. Number 15, butchering day, late November, when the first hard freeze hit, was hog-killing day on most small farms. The whole extended family showed up before dawn. Children had jobs from the start, carrying buckets of hot water, scraping bristles off the scalded hide, turning the crank on the sausage grinder, holding the casings while adults stuffed them, rendering lard in a cast-iron kettle over an open fire. Nothing was wasted. The head became head cheese, the intestines became chitterlings, the fat became lard for cooking and soap making, the blood became blood sausage on German farms in Pennsylvania and the Midwest. A 250-pound hog, raised on table scraps and corn at a total cost of about $15, could produce over 150 pounds of meat that would last the winter in the smokehouse. Children as young as 6 participated. It was not considered traumatic. It was considered education. You learned where food came from, what it cost in labor, and why you did not waste a single bite. The USDA estimated that in 1960, nearly 40% of rural families still butchered at least one hog at home. By 1980, that number had dropped below 5%. We outsourced the hardest lesson food ever taught. Number 14, starting a fire without matches. When the wood stove was the only heat source and the matches got wet, you needed to know alternatives. Farm kids learned to use a flint and steel striker, the kind that hung on a nail by the kitchen door. You would strike the steel against the flint at a sharp angle, catching the spark on a nest of dry tinder. People used corn shucks, cedar bark, or dryer lint saved in a tin. Once the tinder caught, you fed it kindling, then split wood. The whole process took about 2 minutes if you were practiced, and an eternity if you were not. Some kids learned to use a bow drill, though that was more common in scouting than daily farm life. The point was not wilderness survival. The point was practical self-reliance. If the power went out, and on rural farms in the 1960s it went out regularly during ice storms and summer thunderstorms, you needed heat for the house and flame for cooking. A child who could start a fire was not showing off. They were keeping the family warm. Number 13, identifying edible wild plants. Your grandmother knew which plants along the fence row were food and which would put you in the ground. By age 8 or 9, you knew too. Dandelion greens in early spring before they flowered, when they were still tender and not bitter. Wild onions that smelled like onions when you crushed the leaves. Poke salad shoots in April, boiled twice to remove the toxins, never eaten raw. Blackberries along the tree line in July. Persimmons after the first frost turned them sweet. Pawpaws in September if you could find them before the raccoons did. Lamb's quarters, wood sorrel, and plantain grew in every pasture. Mushrooms were the exception. One wrong mushroom and you were dead. No second chances. This knowledge passed from grandmother to mother to child through daily walks, and it connected families to the land in a way that grocery stores completely severed. Number 12, canning and preserving. By late summer, the kitchen became a factory. Bushels of tomatoes, green beans, corn, and peaches covered every surface. Your mom and grandmother stood over boiling water canners, processing jar after jar in a rhythm that ran from dawn to dark for weeks. Children snapped beans, peeled tomatoes blanched in hot water, and packed jars. You learned to check the seal by pressing the lid. If it popped, it had not sealed, and you had to reprocess or eat it that week. A pressure canner was used for low-acid foods like green beans and corn. The gauge had to read exactly 10 pounds of pressure at sea level, and your mom watched it like a hawk because underprocessed food meant botulism, and botulism meant death. The Ball Blue Book was the Bible. Every farm kitchen had one, its pages stained and wrinkled from years of use. A family might put up 400 to 600 jars in a single summer, enough to feed everyone through winter. Mason jars cost about $1 a dozen. Lids were a nickel each. The food inside was worth its weight in security. Number 11. Saddling and riding a horse. On ranches and larger farms, horses were still working animals in the 1960s, not pets. Children learned to approach from the left, always the left, speak low, brush before saddling, check the cinch twice, and mount without spooking the animal. A horse that was cinched too loose could roll the saddle under its belly with you on top. A horse that was startled could bolt through a barbed wire fence. Farm kids learned to ride bareback first, which taught balance, then to use a saddle, which taught control. By 8 or 9 years old, they were riding fence lines alone, checking cattle, and bringing stock in from distant pastures. A good working horse cost about $200 to $400 in 1963, and it was treated as a partner, not a pet. You learned that an animal 3 times your weight would cooperate if you were calm, consistent, and respectful, and would wreck you if you were careless. Number 10. Trapping and snaring. This was not cruelty. This was pest control and income. Farm kids set steel traps and wire snares for raccoons raiding the corn crib, foxes stalking the henhouse, and muskrats damming the irrigation ditches. Fur buyers traveled rural routes in winter, paying cash for pelts. A good raccoon pelt brought $2 to $4 in 1964. A mink pelt could bring $15. A farm kid running a trap line of 20 sets could earn $50 in a season. Real money when a new pair of boots cost $8. You learned to set traps along game trails, disguise them with leaves, and check them every morning before school. You learned to dispatch an animal quickly and humanely, and you learned to skin and stretch a pelt on a board without nicking the hide. This was commerce. Real economics learned at age 9, not from a textbook, but from walking a frozen creek bank at 6 in the morning. Third pattern break. Here is where things get personal. Number 9. Grafting fruit trees. Your grandfather could take a cutting from a neighbor's prize apple tree, slice a notch in a wild rootstock growing along the fence, insert the cutting, wrap it with grafting tape, and grow a tree that bore that exact same variety of apple for the next 50 years. This was not magic. It was plant science practiced by farmers for centuries. Children learned to make clean diagonal cuts with a sharp knife, match the cambium layers where the living tissue meets, and wrap the graft tight enough to hold but loose enough to grow. A successful graft meant free fruit for a generation. A failed graft meant a wasted year. By the 1960s, nursery catalogs were selling grafted trees for $3 to $5 each. But farm families saw no reason to pay for what they could do themselves with a sharp knife and a steady hand. Number 8. Judging livestock. 4-H clubs and county fairs taught farm kids to evaluate animals with the precision of a professional auctioneer. By age 10, a 4-H kid could walk around a steer and tell you its muscle-to-bone ratio, its frame score, its finish, and its estimated hanging weight within 20 pounds. They could look at a dairy cow and assess udder attachment, teat placement, and body capacity. They could evaluate a gilt for litter potential based on the number and spacing of her teats. This was not guessing. This was applied anatomy, genetics, and economics wrapped into one skill. Livestock judging competitions at county and state fairs drew hundreds of young competitors, and the winners often went on to become veterinarians, animal scientists, and cattle buyers. USD, 4-H enrollment records show that over 2 million rural youth participated in livestock projects in 1965. Today, that number has fallen dramatically. We traded hands-on animal evaluation for standardized testing and wonder why fewer young people understand where their food comes from. Number 7. Navigating by stars and landmarks. Before GPS, before even reliable road signs on rural routes, farm kids learned to find their way home by the North Star, by the position of the sun, and by landmarks that had guided their families for generations. That bent cottonwood tree at the creek crossing, the stone wall that ran north from the old Miller place, the water tower visible from 3 counties away on a clear day. Your granddad taught you to find Polaris by following the pointer stars of the Big Dipper. He taught you that moss grows thicker on the north side of trees in dense woods. He taught you that cattle trails generally lead to water. These were not camping tricks. These were practical skills for a child who might be riding a horse alone across open rangeland 5 miles from the nearest house. Getting lost was not an inconvenience. It was a life-threatening emergency, especially in winter. This skill is still taught in military land navigation courses. Your grandfather learned it from his grandfather, who learned it crossing the prairie in a covered wagon. Number 6. Seed saving. Your grandmother did not buy seeds every spring. She saved them. The best tomatoes of the season, the ones with the deepest color and the fewest blemishes, she would scoop out the seeds, ferment them in a jar of water for 3 days to remove the gel coating, then dry them on newspaper in the sun. Beans were left to dry on the vine, shelled and stored in mason jars with a bay leaf to repel weevils. Corn was left on select ears until the husks were papery, then hung in the barn to finish drying. Squash and melon seeds were washed and spread on screens. Each variety was labeled, dated, and stored in a cool, dry place. This was not just frugality, it was genetic selection. Every year, by saving seeds from the best plants, your grandmother was breeding varieties adapted to her exact soil, her climate, her growing season. Seed companies have spent decades convincing us to buy new hybrid seeds every year, seeds that cannot be saved because the offspring will not breed true. Your grandmother's open-pollinated varieties would reproduce faithfully forever. That knowledge, that independence, was worth more than any catalog. Number 5. Predicting frost. Getting this wrong by one night could cost a family an entire garden's worth of food. Farm kids learned to watch for the signs. Clear skies at sunset with no wind meant radiational cooling and a likely frost. A heavy dew at dusk actually meant less chance of frost because the moisture released heat. A ring around the moon meant moisture moving in, which usually brought clouds that held warmth in. If the thermometer on the back porch read 40 degrees at 10 p.m. and was still dropping, you were covering the tomatoes with old bed sheets before you went to sleep. Your mom would send you out with a flashlight and an armload of sheets, and you would drape every tomato cage, pepper plant, and squash vine. In the morning, you would pull the covers off before the sun cooked the plants underneath. One night of effort saved months of work. This instinct for reading temperature, humidity, wind, and sky as a single system was a kind of intelligence that standardized education never measured and never valued. Number 4. Well and pump maintenance. Rural farms in the 1960s depended on hand-dug or drilled wells, and the hand pump or electric pump that drew water was the single most critical piece of equipment on the property. More important than the tractor. No water meant no livestock, no garden, no cooking, no washing, and no life on that land. Children learned to prime a hand pump by pouring water into the top to create suction. They learned to listen for the sound of a pump sucking air, which meant the water table had dropped or the foot valve was leaking. They learned to replace leather pump cups and reseat check valves. When the electric pump failed during a storm, the whole family switched to the backup hand pump, and children were expected to pump water for livestock by the bucket. 50 head of cattle drink roughly 750 gallons a day. That is a lot of pumping. This skill connected children to the most fundamental resource on the planet and taught them that water is not something that just comes out of a faucet. It comes from the earth, and it takes work to bring it up. Number 3, woodworking and basic carpentry. Woodworking and basic carpentry. A farm kid with a hammer, a handsaw, and a square could build a functional chicken coop, a feed trough, a gate, or a set of shelves by age 10. Not pretty. Functional. Farms could not afford to call a carpenter every time a stall board broke or a fence post needed a brace. Your dad taught you to measure twice and cut once, to drive a nail straight, and to use a level. He taught you to cut a lap joint for a gate that would swing true for 20 years. The barn was the classroom, and every broken board was a lesson. Recent studies at Texas A&M University found that children who engage in hands-on construction activities develop stronger spatial reasoning, problem-solving ability, and executive function than children who learn only through screens and textbooks. The researchers noted that the neural pathways activated by physical building, measuring, visualizing three-dimensional structures, and manipulating real materials are fundamentally different from those used in digital learning. Our grandparents knew this without the study. They just called it chores. Fourth pattern break. Number 2, animal first aid. When a calf got scours, you did not call the vet at 11 o'clock at night. You mixed up an electrolyte solution from a recipe your mother kept taped inside the kitchen cabinet door. Water, salt, baking soda, and a little corn syrup. You tube-fed the calf if it was too weak to suck from a bottle. When a horse stepped on a nail, you cleaned the wound with iodine, packed it with pine tar, and watched for signs of tetanus. When a cow prolapsed after calving, you pushed everything back in, stitched if you knew how, and prayed. Farm kids assisted in these emergencies from the time they were old enough to hold a flashlight. They learned to recognize bloat in cattle, milk fever in fresh cows, and respiratory illness in hogs. They could give intramuscular injections by age 9. A bottle of penicillin cost about $3 and sat in every farm refrigerator next to the butter. Number 1, the work ethic itself. This is not a single skill. It is the foundation underneath every other entry on this list. A 1960s farm kid woke before dawn, did chores before school, came home and did chores after school, and worked sunup to sundown on weekends and all summer. There were no participation trophies. The tractor did not care about your self-esteem. The cow did not wait because you were tired. The hay did not stop baling because it was your birthday. You learned that effort and outcome were directly connected. Lazy meant hungry, careless meant injured, consistent meant survival. A 1966 USDA study found that children on family farms contributed an average of 20 hours of productive labor per week during the school year and over 40 hours per week in summer. That is not childhood as we define it today. But those children grew into adults who could fix anything, build anything, grow anything, and endure anything. They carried a quiet competence that showed in the way they shook your hand, the way they looked you in the eye, and the way they never complained about hard work because they had known real hard work since before they could read. Here is my challenge. Ask someone over 65 years old if they remember any of these. Watch their face change. Watch the pride come back into their eyes when they tell you about the morning that they pulled a calf by themselves, or the summer they stacked hay until they could not lift their arms. Then ask yourself what skills your children are learning that will matter in 50 years. Because those farm kids from the 1960s did not just learn to work. They learned to survive. And that is something no app, no algorithm, and no amount of screen time will ever replace. Drop a comment telling me which skill surprised you most. And if you grew up on a farm, tell me the one I missed. I know there are more.